For me, mental toughness isn't like rejecting or avoiding those difficult thoughts or feelings or distracting yourself from them. It's like sitting with them and bringing them with you over the course of the race and continuing to show up and do the hard stuff anyway, right? Like you're not blocking them out. You're bringing them with you while you continue to do hard things. Like that's what being an athlete is about. That's what mental toughness is. And sometimes that means a DNF, like sitting with that. Like that makes sense. It sucks. Yeah, you did want to finish. That makes sense. You should it makes sense you feel that way, you know? No need to run from it.
Welcome to the Low Tide Boys, a Swimrun podcast. I'm Chip.
And I'm Chris, and this is episode 297 of the show. Thank you for watching this on YouTube if you're into that sort of thing, or listening to it wherever you listen to your podcast. We're making a request this week. We want everyone to hit that subscribe button, leave a review. It really helps other people find the show. We just got back from Sweden a few days ago, still kind of dealing with a little bit of that jet lag. And we got an awesome show for everyone this week. We have Dr. Erin Ayala. She's a sports psychologist, an extreme endurance athlete in her own right, to talk about what happens on the other side of the mountain. Now, we recorded this conversation before we went to Ayala, and we were like, hey, what is it like after your A race? Like, what are some mental strategies to deal with after your big event, literally on the other side of the mountaintop? So we brought her on to really kind of go through kind of mindsets, tricks, tips, things you can do to kind of work on that side, whether you're feeling like post-race blues.
Yeah, which I know some people are definitely in the throes of. I know we certainly have been there post a big event. And I think I really like the focus of this episode because I think a lot of people focus on, what goals are the A race and like planning and getting your training right and mental prep. But it's like that maybe that's setting, that getting to that mountaintop. And then like you said, on the other side there, how do you kind of deal with that? When's the right time to sign up for a race? Dr. Erin gives some good tips there. And I'm totally subscribed to that. But yeah, I mean, she's also a badass endurance athlete herself on the gravel scene as well.
Yeah. So in this conversation, we talk about her background, sort of how she got into sports psychology, kind of what her practice looks like, her own personal endurance journey, which is pretty remarkable. Yeah. Spoiler alert, 200-mile endurance bike rides, gravel rides, like crazy stuff. And then we really get into, okay, it's like you got your A race. What happens when you DNF? What happens when things go sideways? What happens when, even if you have the perfect race,
even have that, like you unlock the perfect race somehow.
Like what do you do afterwards? So this conversation, I think, is just full of a lot of knowledge bombs and just great for anyone, whether you just raced Ayala last week or there's a race that's coming up that's really you're putting on a pedestal. Like, how do we get our mind right around not just racing these things, but then when it's over, compartmentalizing it, moving on and moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a great conversation. I'm sure we'll get good feedback about that. We could get into a training update. We've officially locked in our last two swim runs of the year. So we will be at the start line of Otelo, Colorado, coming up here in less than a month.
Yep.
October, the first weekend in October, and then headed back for our fifth consecutive to Austin. So really looking forward to both of those races.
Yeah, and in theory, I am racing Swimrun Cape Cod.
Yes.
Third time's the charm. Hopefully.
And this is a solo.
I'm racing it solo. At time of recording, I'm racing it solo. We'll see what happens because, as much as I'm curious what it'd be like to race solo, I feel like I've become even more of a purist this year. I'm wanting to race with people, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, looking forward to being out there. Third time's the charm, baby.
Yep. So we have 3 more swim runs on the books for the rest of the year. And then Chris and I have fall marathons as well. So more running in our future, but we are certainly got not like we ever lost the bug, but recaught the Ayala bug, stacking those points. So we have 2 more races for this year to earn those points, and we've been earning them throughout. So feeling like we're going to put in for a show.
Yeah, we should have enough points to go back for the 20th edition of Ayala, the Swim World Championship. And Chipper, I don't know how you felt. Certainly, my FOMO meter when we were out there, we talked about this last week, it's probably like 40% like FOMO, and then like 6% is like, I'm not ready for this right now.
Yeah.
Definitely. But, what really I've been thinking about since we've come back is just like, this, we've said it before, this race in particular, Ayala, the Swim World Championship, just demands so much respect And
Certainly.
and I think that's where like a conversation like this with Dr. Ayala is actually really helpful, because it kind of helps you, this race needs to be on a pedestal and you need to take it really seriously, unless you're some sort of freak athlete and you just like roll out of bed and do this stuff. And those people exist, and good for you.
They don't exist
not,
here though.
That's not for us.
That's not
like
us.
like we need to set our intention for this thing. We need to like put all our eggs in this basket and really focus on trying to be prepared for this thing. And I feel like this conversation is, I know I'm going to be listening to it as we're building for the race, assuming we get in, as we're building for this race, just to make sure, keeping the main thing, thinking about it the right way, and just trying to give it as much respect as it requires, but also not get so over our skis in terms of just like, kind of getting sort of psyched out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought what I really like from this, she gives like good frameworks on how to do it before and after. So you'll walk away with some good frameworks to apply to your next race, Ayala, Colorado in our case, and checking in on some of the stuff that we have been doing without trying to be super intentional about it, but our, how's the body, how's the mind check-ins that we've been doing for probably a decade now have unintentionally been super helpful, apparently. So Dr. Erin was able to confirm that for us.
Yeah,
so
who knew?
That's good. Cool. There's still time to register and race. We have Orcas Island this weekend. So if you can smash up to the San Juan Islands in Washington State, there's still time to register there. We have Colorado first year race in Fort Collins. Really looking forward to that one. And then Austin for the Ayala series. So you can save 10% on those race registrations. What's the code?
LTBZ10. Save 10% off your registration. Oh, and by the way, the news out of Austin is that
this is
Lake
exciting.
Travis, Colorado River,
95%.
It's full.
It's up there. I think cliff jumps are back on the menu, people.
Cliff jumps are on the menu,
They're on
baby.
the menu. So you got to go to Austin, and that's always such a great community. It's like the perfect kind of cherry on top for the year. Big community feel, lots of new folks getting out there, kind of catching the bug. So really excited to finish the year out strong on the swimrun scene.
For sure.
Cool. Well, without any further ado, we will kick it over to our conversation with the good doctor herself, Dr. Erin.
Yeah. Doctor. Very excited to welcome to the show Dr. Erin Ayala, sports psychologist. I've known her for a little while now, and I'm always extremely impressed by her candor and just her wealth of knowledge. And I was like, who needs to hear about this? Our swimrun community. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm stoked to be here. This will be fun.
Yeah. So, when I reached out to you, I was like, hey, we participate in this fringe sport. We got a fringe podcast for this fringe sport. And you're like, I love fringe sports. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and kind of how you got into, why did you want to become a sports psychologist?
Yeah. It's funny because it's genuinely an accident. Like, I did not plan to become a sports psychologist. I also never planned to be a therapist. I'm very much like researcher, professor, and was academic track. And then stumbled across sports psychology and fell in love with it. And so I guess my kind of mini story, I haven't been a lifelong athlete. I was a dabbler in high school, I did everything from bowling to hurdles, and then saw the inside of a gym maybe 3 or 4 times in college. And then when I got to grad school it was a PhD program in the Northeast in upstate New York in Albany. Lots of early career professionals, law school, pharmacy school, PhD students, and also pretty outdoorsy. We had the 46ers in the Adirondacks, you've got the Catskills. And so I realized there was a huge disconnect between my resume and CV and who I wanted to be inside as a person. And I think someone made an offhanded comment about me not being an athlete or not working out, and that lit a fire inside of me. And I was like, let's go. So I pulled out my old sneakers and faded black capri cotton pants from how many years ago, ran maybe half a mile before I was like, this sucks. And then found a pancake run. It was just I came across someone who was like, oh, you should join us on Saturdays. We run 4.5 miles or 7. You can do 2 loops if you want to do 15. And I was thinking to myself, who would do 15 miles on a Saturday? And then less than a year later, I'm running marathons. So I got the bug quickly.
Nice.
And it turned into a really healthy coping mechanism for me for setting boundaries. I have a really hard time. I love work, and that can get the best of me. And so if I'm registered for a race, I have to train for it, and it helps me train consistently. I really value my own health and wellness, and so it holds me accountable. So did marathons for a while. Boyfriend at the time got a road bike, got me into riding. Our friends got into triathlon. We went to Ironman Lake Placid to spectate, and it was chills watching that swim start in like Mirror Lake in upstate New York, Adirondacks in the background. So cool. And I was like, I need to do this. So next thing you know, we're doing an Ironman Lake Placid. I still, as much as I love learning about Swimrun, I am not a swimmer. And so I couldn't convince myself to love swimming, and I can wreak havoc on the bike. So then when we moved to Minnesota, I was like, I'm just going to ride and race my bike. And then that's when I hit the gravel community. Pretty fringe. It's really popular. It's getting really popular now. But when it first started, it was like you regularly got lost on the course. Like there's no, fuel. There aren't any aid stations. Like you've got people at all walks of life coming to do it. And it was so cool, and got that bug and haven't looked back since. So my kind of main cycling, I've done kind of the roadie scene with crit racing, which is basically like Formula One on bikes. But gravel is my jam. And my favorite distance is like century or double century. For any cyclists listening, I'm a big fan of Unbound. So I'm a 4-time finisher of Unbound 200, and I'm going back for the 5th this year.
Wow. For folks at home, it used to be called the Dirty Kwanzaa or something?
It used to be Dirty Kanza. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then they rebranded.
And there's like a couch
at
some point in the middle somewhere? Okay.
It's like Chase the
That's
Chase.
the only thing, 3 things I know about it.
That's it. They set up there's a Chase lounge, like velvet, everything in the middle of Kansas in the Flint Hills, and you stop for a photo session. Yeah.
It's definitely good for the Instagram account.
It's usually like mile 160 out of 200.
You're like, maybe I'll kick the legs up a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like, is it a mirage? Is the couch out?
Right? Yeah. Am I hallucinating again? Yeah. So that's my background. I work with, and then as a sports psychologist, again, that was kind of accidental. I was a faculty member, and they wanted me to do private practice. I was teaching the doctoral level, and they wanted the faculty to practice in the community what we were teaching, which makes sense. I was being pretty picky because I didn't want to be a traditional therapist. It just wasn't my vibe. And then came across a sports psychology position, and I said, do you need part-time work? Because I can do that, and the rest is history. So I always say 8 hours a week turned to 15 to 20 to 25. And next thing you know, I have essentially 2 full-time jobs, and I have to quit one. So I left academia and then built my own private practice 2+ years ago. I went independent, and I've been building and scaling since. I'd say about 80% of my athletes are endurance athletes. So a lot of paddlers and rowers, which are very different sports, by the way, I've since learned. Pretty much any kind of endurance, we've got it. I work with a lot of adaptive athletes, para-athletes, some of which are looking at the Winter Games. And then a good amount of high schoolers, like track and field, cross country, swimming, and those endurance types of sports. So,
I mean, that sounds smart. Kind of get them young, get their mind right before they, lose it.
Absolutely.
Get too burnt out.
Really genuinely support the next generation of athletes like us, right? Like we need lifelong athletes, especially in endurance sports. They're so much more accessible than like football. It's hard to hop into a football game if you're a lineman in your 40s, right? You can become an endurance athlete in your 40s much more handily. So
For sure.
So that's my background.
Love it.
That's quite impressive, and I like how you fuse the two together. You really, if I was in your chair, I would be like, hey, this Erin gets me. She gets what we're doing, waking up at 5 in the morning to go to the pool or hit the trainer or whatever. That always resonates.
Yeah.
Which is why Chris, obviously, great call. Swim runners, I think probably, and gravel riders would,
get along.
I think they get on just fine.
Yeah.
They're both hanging out in the same corner of the bar where
Exactly
our athletes are there,
Yeah.
they're sort of commingling.
Yep.
Erin, we wanted to bring you on again. We go back a way, so I have a sense of how you think and how you support your athletes. And, at the time of airing of this, we'll be past the biggest event of the year, the World Championship for Swimrun, Ayala Swimrun World Championship. And, I wanted to bring you on to really kind of think about, okay, well, what happens on the other side of the mountaintop?
Yeah.
For a lot of folks, they've been, speak for Chipper, if I can speak for Chipper and myself, when we did the World Championship 2 years in a row, it was a big mental burden. And we kind of kept that for 2 years to the point where after the second year, we're like, all right, let's like literally take a year off. And, we respected the race. It's super challenging. I know I sent you some stuff to kind of like,
I did a deep dive. You warned me, and I went there. Yep.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's like, let me just wet your whistle a little bit on this, and you just took the whole bottle, which is which happens a lot. That's how most people get into Swimrun. It's a 2:30 a.m. YouTube rabbit hole.
Yep.
So we want to chat with you. Obviously, it's a huge effort to get up for a race like this and complete it. So whether you succeed or fail, I thought it'd be interesting to chat about, post-race blues, what happens afterwards, kind of what have you seen in your practice? So maybe starting like, hey, the race is upon us. How do you try to coach people up in your therapy room to not just be ready for the event and the outcome goal, but also the post-race after?
Yep. Yeah. And I think it's like the longer the race or the less frequent the event, the more important this conversation is, right? So I really prioritize these conversations with athletes for anything I'd say over, basically, like the Attila distance, anything over like 7 or 8 hours, it takes up a big footprint and a lot of real estate in your brain with the prep, especially if you're traveling internationally. Marathons are arguably really big, but people can do more than one in a year or a season. World championships only come around so often. And so Olympic, Paralympic games are another really classic example. These athletes are working on 2 to 4 year cycles. And so it's not like they can jump into another race and get redemption. And so Attila is going to be really similar to that. Like they've been ramping up to this for a long time. And then often we have this idea in our head of how it's going to go down. And we've got all of these hopes and dreams and aspirations. And then anyone listening who's done any of these races know they never go according to plan. And so then how can you plan for that while maintaining a healthy mindset, right? And I think one of the big things is just preparing for that. Sometimes it's a letdown. I call it kind of like a like restlessness and kind of like this feeling of like listlessness, kind of lost. Sometimes you'll get like brain fog and fatigue. I mean, the recovery is substantial, both mentally and physically. And so I'll often joke with my athletes, I'll be like, don't sign up for any more races within the 2 weeks after finishing this one. Of course, like Ironman will get you and, you can sign up and so it really depends, but you're emotionally making decisions and we have to think about the lifestyle and the ramp up to these races and how it affects work, family, social life. I mean, all of these hobbies, like it really takes over. And when we're really quick to register for another one, it's kind of that quick fix Band-Aid. But we really do have to let it digest and process. And that's what Chris is talking about, that post-race blues and that letdown. It's like we have to make sense of how the race went and reflect on it before going to the next one. Otherwise, you skip that. We've been talking a lot and, where Chris and I know each other, like process and mastery. That's why we're athletes. If everything always went according to plan, we probably wouldn't be doing this. It would be really boring. It's about that chase and getting that puzzle to come together, right?
Definitely. Between your athletes there, and I like the 2 week kind of blackout window. No races. You can't sign up for anything. Like go buy a new pair of shoes or something.
Check yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any things that you see with the athletes that you work with on like how to kind of help that process along? Because I mean, I remember when I did my first Ironman, I really went through this thing as well, and I was like, well, I don't know. I guess, do I need to wake up early to train anymore? It's like I don't have anything to go for. So how do you kind of recommend people help themselves along and process
And let me
the
add
big
some
event?
context. So I've known Chipper for a long time, and this is a pattern with you, Chipper, where too long, way too long.
Where it's like talking to each other, so that's
certainly a race, like major A race. Like Chipper kind of goes into a hole. When we did our first 50K, I couldn't get him back on the trails for a while.
Yeah,
we needed his first Ironman. I couldn't get him back in aquatic park for a while. Even after we did our first Attila, you were a little listless, and we had some races that were already scheduled. And it was just kind of like you were kind of mad to use your point.
Yeah, I think especially, and this is also, I often joke as a therapist, I say like, it depends. Another thing worth naming is potential DNFs. Like if you're pulled or you don't make a time cutoff or you can't finish what you came for, that can be really hard. And that's when you often have athletes jumping in and looking for the next one, because then they're like, I'm going to use this fitness that I have. I didn't get to maximize what I've worked so hard for. So I think one thing that I often say for athletes is like, we thrive off of routines and structure, not just as athletes, but just as human beings. Our brains like routines, even if our personality doesn't. We function best as a system when we've got a routine. And so I tell the athletes, like, one of the things to kind of look out for, and what I tell them not to do is, don't, if they're like Training Peaks, for example, or Final Surge for runners, whatever app you're using to kind of account for your training, put something in there those next couple of weeks where you've got some sort of structure. Because what can happen is that you're so used to planning that out every, Sunday. All right, how am I going to get all my training in this week? What's it going to look like? And then the race is over and you look and it's nothing. And then that like training fitness score starts to drop. And it's like this whole cycle. It's a spiral. So I say to
Trigger
them,
warning.
right? Like put
Yeah.
something in there. And it might be, riding, running, swimming, unplugged, change something up. When we're really structured, we don't have as much autonomy or creativity or flexibility with what we're doing. So what have you been missing? Go back to that and just dabble, like play, have fun, just move the body and don't go hit it too hard. And I'll also kind of warn athletes of like, what are the thoughts that are going to come up that could lead to self-sabotage? And then how do we want to deal with those when they show up? And it's often like, I don't want to lose my fitness. But we know, any of us who have been doing this long enough, if you try to train through that peak race, you're going to hit a plateau. You're going to burn out by the start of the next season. So you've got to take a break. And that's hard.
Yeah, and I think especially like as to your point, Erin, like the bigger the race, the more capital A that it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you've trained right, you're kind of going off like a fitness cliff anyway, because you can't sustain that level of effort. So there is like a come down that whether you DNF or not, like you've peaked. So peaking means that you're not staying at the peak,
right.
That or else it's not peaking, right?
It's not sustainable, right? Yep. Mm-hmm. And I think that's another conversation that athletes have to have, is understanding that and kind of preparing for it, because we often don't prepare for it. And then we get that listlessness or that restlessness, that anxiety. A lot of us, myself included, we take pride in our numbers, our data, the fitness we've worked so hard for. But it's like, just because that number is going down doesn't mean you've lost it. It's like we get more fit through rest and adaptation. So that number is such a small piece of the puzzle. It'd be comparable to looking at times for the race. Like, you don't know the conditions. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So it's having to look at that bigger picture and maintain perspective.
Yeah.
That's super helpful. Yeah. The keeping the structure in the week is something that I found to be really helpful for me. And this is turning into a chipper session, but
Let's do it.
sorry. But Chris knows, like, I really, for like 2 weeks, I couldn't even get out for a run. Like, I just didn't feel like doing anything after these. And now I've started to, and it's like, oh, hey, let me go on a hike on Sunday instead of long run. It's a family hike that we're going out, or get in the pool and just kind of move the blood a little bit. So I have found that to be a really helpful mechanism, because the structure is really necessary. And we're sort of trained, pun intended, I guess, to be in that. Well, I do these workouts on these days and move it on. Move it on down there. Now, Chris and I have worked and talked a lot about, hey, the goals that you're setting at kind of the peak there. Yeah, some of them maybe are time goals, but don't get so hung up. Oh, I was looking for this time or that, because that's gonna, you're almost certainly kind of setting yourself up for that. What do you kind of see in terms of with the athletes you're working with before the race or maybe the day of? How are they kind of setting themselves up to be, really present with that one event and really kind of maximize the feel that they had their A race and they also had their A race experience, and they really kind of were in the groove, or, in the flow, or whatever you want to call it.
It's one of my favorite types of sessions to do with athletes, is that pre-race, because there are so many feelings and it's like the calm before the storm, and they're tapered. So there's also a lot of energy that they haven't been able to use. Like, they're like, let's go. And that anticipation about what they're about to go through, that also is a different type of energy that we all know and sometimes love. I love having those sessions. And then same thing is that end cap is meeting with them. And when athletes they want guidance on when and how often to meet for sports psych. And so if they have, like, I've got a couple folks, for example, doing Margie Gessick is coming up. It's in the UP of Michigan. It's a brutal race. They also have a duathlon. So it's maybe a 50K trail ultra and then a 100-mile mountain bike. It's technical. It's wild.
Wow.
And so what I'll do is I'll say, okay, let's meet every so often, but I want to make sure we meet the week leading into the race and then the week following. Because otherwise, it's like the example I'll often use is like studying for an exam. It's like if you get, passing boards is going to be different because you're done if for anyone dealing with licensure. But for anyone who wants to master the material or learn it, you take an exam, you get it back, you look through it. Like, what did I do well? What did I nail? What did I miss? Like, oh, noted. Okay, not know that for next time. But as athletes, we don't often reflect on the races after we have them, and that's where the money is. Like, that's where the learnings are. For leading into it, I'll say, like, okay, hold your times lightly. Like, we don't know what's going to happen. We can assume something will. And so I'll do some contingency planning and kind of if then. And so, like, cyclists, okay, you get a mechanical on the bike. What are your options? Let's talk through this. You lose for, swim run, you lose a paddle. Like, what are our options here? How are we going to do this? Something happens with your shoe, wetsuit malfunctions, whatever it is. Like, we know those things are going to happen. Nutrition, how are we going to feel 10 hours into the race and all you have is gel? Like, what are your options? And so it's trying to game plan, because then when it happens, they're less likely to make an emotional decision, because research also shows, you're in this kind of low energy availability state. You're burning so much glycogen. Our brains need glycogen to make good decisions. And when we are 10 hours into a race, we are not always making the best decisions just because we're so exhausted. And so when it comes to nutrition, strategy, navigation, those types of decisions, we have to kind of plan ahead, knowing that we're not going to be fully present during those, because you can't be fully present for, 8 to 14 hours. Like, it's just, we're human. It's not going to happen.
I mean, I feel like that's so true with swimrun in particular, because one thing we've mentioned on the show for a super long time, and you're going to get this implicitly, Erin, is, especially the longer the race, it's not whether something's going to go sideways or not. It's like something is going to happen.
Yeah.
And what we always say, it's like, you have to have the belief, because you've done the training, you have your partner, that you're going to make the best decision you can with the information you have at hand.
Exactly.
And like, that's really all there is. And can you be present in that moment and just like evaluate, Chipper, are we lost or not? Like, do we need to go left or, or whatever's going on, right?
Yep.
Do we need a DNF or not? Whatever the decision might be, you have to have that self-belief, to trust your own thought process.
Yep.
And what we always say is like, knowing that that's sort of the nature of things allows you to then not be shocked when the nature of things happen.
Exactly. Because how many people, and this is one of my pet peeves as a sports psychologist, will say, visualize success, think positive, be confident, right? What does success look like for swim run? There are a lot of different versions of that. So we're not going to visualize or plan for the race with no obstacles or issues, where stomach feels great, legs feel fresh. Like, no, that's not going to happen. So why would you try to prepare for that? And then a lot of people are concerned. They're like, well, I don't want to manifest something going wrong. And I'm like, well, what are the chances that something's going to go wrong? Pretty high. So why wouldn't you prepare for that? For anyone who follows ultra running, like Courtney Dauwalter is such a great example of this. She has this analogy of this like filing cabinet. So when she's training, which this is great for especially people coming off worlds, like these are really experienced, most of them really experienced athletes, especially just given the training that they've done. Every time there's an equipment malfunction or a nutrition issue, or you hit the dark and stormy miles or kilometers of the race and you don't know how to get yourself out mentally, you basically imagine this as like one more file that you're adding to your kind of visual filing cabinet. So then on race day, if something happens, you think about that filing cabinet and like, okay, how have I dealt with this in the past? What do I need to do right now? And that's a nice way to think about it.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and having a big violent camel might not be a horrible thing if you got lots of good experiences to call on there.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. The more experienced athletes, and it's like we've been through this before. These things have happened, right? There's also something kind of nice about being new. It's like because I feel like when you're new, there are fewer expectations because you don't know what you're getting yourself into. So that's also kind of refreshing. And a lot of people often say like their first marathon is one of their best because they went in without any
Mm.
expectations. And then once you've got the time, you start chasing it. So that's another thing too with these like world championship races is like, well, I podiumed last year. So then there's this like pressure to do it again, even though conditions might be wildly different or circumstances or your fitness, right? Or life. So,
Yeah, it's funny you say it that way because some of the best piece of advice that we got before we did our first world championship was do it before you think you're ready for it. Because once you
yeah,
do it, you'll realize like you're never ever truly ready for it
Never
because it's
ready.
of the
totally.
day. And yeah, I mean, and we found it to be true. We sort of qualified, managed to get enough points to do it. And we were thinking that we'd want to do it the following year, but here we are.
Yep.
And I think that the way we prep for it, obviously we did the training, we respected the challenge, but our thinking, and Chipper and I, as a team sport, like the better in agreement we were, the better experience we were going to have, we thought. And that seems obvious, but that's not always the case, I guess.
Yep.
And for us, it was like, we want to train like we're going to war so that when we get there, we can play like we're at Disney and just like have as much fun as possible. And just like, we already know we're not going to win it. We just don't want to get hurt. We want to have some cool stories to tell our kids or whatever on the podcast. Obviously we don't want to be out there all day either. So we were trying to put down a respectable time that we thought would be representative of all the training we did. And we worked with our coach to kind of figure that out. But I think that approach served us really well because we respected the hell out of it and we're nervous and, the whole nine. But when we got there, it's like, hey, we know we're going to be able to do these swims. We know we're going to be able to cover this distance. And then, kind of like acquiesce to the adventure of it, knowing that it's first impression. We don't know. For us, it's almost like what's better, the first time or the second time. And when we ask people, it's like, some people are like, well, it's nice to know what's there. But some people are like, it's actually nice not to know.
Right.
Because like the second time that you really know. So when we did it the following year, it was certainly the case where it was like a heavier sort of like mental burden because like we knew what was coming.
You knew what you're getting yourselves into. Yep.
And it's helpful for sure. But it was also like a little bit of that ignorance. It really was bliss that first year.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's tough too because sometimes as athletes we get stuck on this hedonic treadmill, like we're looking for the next fix or the next win, right? Whether it may not be a podium, it may be finishing, it may be something more process related. But I think about the first time I finished the Ironman was not as climactic as I thought it would be. It was really cool. I didn't have any expectations for times or anything like that. I did feel really prepared and I had trained really well. But finishing Unbound 200 the first time, I'm not, despite being a therapist, not a very emotional person. Like I don't cry very often. I was bawling. And I was just like so raw and real. And I had been stripped of everything in the 15 plus hours leading to that finish line. It was such a cool feeling. And I definitely have not felt that in my subsequent finishes. Right. So there is something about kind of that first time that is really powerful. But the experience gives you so much more because you just get to go what you're getting yourselves into. So, yeah.
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 Going back to what you said about sort of processing the race is where like the big missed opportunity is from people. I know
Yeah.
when you said that, I would be like, oh yeah, go back on my Strava. I would like look at my heart rate and all this kind of like certainly analyzing the data is one aspect.
Yep.
How else do you kind of recommend people unpacking the race? And then for a little bit of a curveball, especially in a paired sport, like
Yeah.
Chris and I have this tradition of like, hey, let's come over, hang out, and we'll each like kind of share our race report or give it to each other how our
Awesome.
experience was. So how would you kind of recommend folks do this? And they are going to have a partner available to do that.
If they've done, like, I think there's a couple ways to do it. And at the end of the day, it's like there's no right or wrong way. It's what works best for you as an athlete, depending on your style and really what brings you joy and satisfaction. It depends on your personal values as an athlete. Like, what is your why? Why do you do it to begin with? Why did you sign up in the first place? But if they've done kind of this pre-race session in a more structured way, often we'll have like an outcome goal, which might be finishing. And then there's usually more performance related goals. So it might be something about being really consistent in the swim or the run. It might be like how they're approaching elevation or altitude or the hiking. And so it's kind of how you compare to yourself, which in this case would be like the different sections or stages. And then they'll have process goals. And those are usually like heart rate, nutrition, but it might be saying hi to everyone you pass. It might be making sure that you limit aid stations or checkpoints to a certain time period. It's really about that process and the vibe that you want to bring to the race. For swim run, it could be how you treat your partner. And, I'm sure it's a roller coaster. But if you're able to train together, I realize a lot of them aren't able to train as often as they'd like. It can help because then you know what some of their warning signs are. And so what I'll often do for kind of the post-race debrief is I'll kind of go back to say, okay, did you hit those goals? Why or why not? Like what got in the way? And then we can note that for next time this happens. And it also helps them kind of think about their training and how they want to approach it. So then with that post-race letdown, it kind of gives them a carrot to think about. And then the other thing I really like is breaking it up in terms of, especially for these longer races, like, okay, how are you technically? Like, did you start to let's think about, like your form and your technique, especially in the latter half. Like, were you really dragging? And is that something that you want to work on? How are you strategically? Let's think about navigation. Let's think about nutrition decisions. Let's think about your strategy for the race. Were you trying to be a slow burn? Were you trying to get ahead in certain sections? How did that go for you? How's the mental game? We know there are going to be dark and stormy miles. How did you handle them? Did you go down those dark holes? We'll kind of break it up into those sections. And then physically, in terms of fitness, like, how'd you do? And not necessarily performance related, but it's like, how was the climbing for you? How'd you handle the conditions? How is the even like temperature regulation and things like that? So you kind of break it down into those components. And that makes it a little bit easier for the athletes because it's less about the time itself or their place.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's really validating. So one thing that Chipper and I started asking Chipper this, I don't know, like 10 years ago or something, we sort of incorporated into the show, was like, after anything, was like, how's the body? How's the mind?
Exactly.
It's kind of breaking it up. But I love like the more nuance you add there, because there's certainly like, you could be like, how's the system too, in a way, like, were you processing well? Did you make like boneheaded decisions? I mean, we've all been there.
Totally.
Where you're like, oh, I'll just like,
Yeah.
plow through this, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
so that kind of leads to, so we're getting to the post race. So I'm curious, in your experience, what are the usual post race feelings that your athletes tend to have? And maybe we can just go from there into sort of coping or strategies to deal with.
I think one of the biggest ones is just kind of this like feeling kind of lost. It's like the rug is pulled out from under you. And because we spend so much time, months, if not years, thinking about this one event, and now it's gone, like it's done. And so that feeling of kind of lost and what's next, especially if it doesn't really go as planned, or if you have really high hopes or expectations and you like didn't have that feeling of like overwhelm crossing the finish line and it was more like underwhelming or anticlimactic, that can lead to a lot of like frustration isn't even the right word, or disappointment. It's like this like angst or depressed feelings of kind of this like hopelessness, or like, well, what's next? If I didn't get it this time, then what do I do now? Do I keep doing this? Why did I do it in the first place? It's kind of starting to overanalyze. And then because you're not exercising regularly, your regular outlet for processing those emotions isn't there. We all know on the long rides, runs, and swims, like that's often when we work out some stuff, but you don't have that outlet to work it out like you usually would. And so then that creates this like tension. So how it usually shows up, isolation, which you noted with Chip, we just kind of like shut down, and it can be less likely to respond to text messages or emails. It can be not like turning down, I say like opting out, just like saying no to social invites, skipping rides, even if you've, or runs, like if there's like an easy shakeout run and you could totally do it, you just choose not to. And so avoidance can be really big. One of the biggest ones I see with athletes is irritability. Is like they're just kind of edgy and they're not sure why, but usually they're not the ones to identify it. It's usually their partner. So being like, dude,
Yeah, I
like,
would think
we're
so.
done. Like, stop. So like that can be a big thing. Like looking for the next fix is really big, kind of like chasing that next thing. And again, what I always say is you've got to get through that first, as horrible as it is. Just like the race itself, we know that there are going to be those dark and stormy miles, and the come down is really similar. I'm trying to think of some others. Those are usually the main ones. Sometimes it'll be people more like doom scrolling on social media, bedtime procrastination. They don't have that structure of getting up early for their master's swim. So then they're like, oh, I can stay up late tonight. And that can lead to sleep issues. Nutrition can kind of get thrown off. So that's why I always say, like, stick to the routine. Nutrition can change a lot because you're used to fueling at a certain level. And so I often encourage people, like, stay with the routine and, talk to a dietitian about if and how to change something. But like, you're still burning a lot of calories. You still have the same muscles and the same body. Like, keep fueling, because that can also affect your mood and your sleep and everything else and your recovery.
Yeah, I think so specifically with the World Championship, I think because of the level of difficulty, there's always a pretty good chance of people missing cutoffs,
Yep.
people getting injured,
Yep.
a lot of sort of DNFs, even some DNSs,
Yep.
type of thing.
Yeah.
Totally. It's the whole weekend. It's a real pressure cooker once you're there.
Yeah.
Specifically for swimrun, what we always tell people is like, hey, if you showed up to the start line, like, respect, like, just getting to the start line, that's the goal, and then you just go as far as you can, and we hope everyone makes it to the finish. But the reality is, this race is super freaking hard. It's so freaking hard that there's no way you could hold this race in the United States, because the insurance lobby would not allow this race to happen.
Right.
True.
I mean, there's like literally slippery rocks that you can fall into crevasses by the water and stuff. So it's like level difficulty sky high. Any advice for, let's say that you did DNF this thing that you spent 8 months like totally obsessing about, like anything like unique, like even using that almost like a strongman example that you could
It's
fill out.
like what I often say is, like, as athletes, just by being athletes, we automatically, it's like this informed consent that we never actually sign. We are signing up for more highs and lows in life because we're spending so much time and energy kind of like mastering this craft, training and thinking about all of these things. And so it's embracing the highs and accepting the lows. And the longer the distance, the more likely it is that we're going to have DNFs or DNSs. And that's also part of it. Like, I try to think of it from like a cultural perspective and a values perspective, is like, this is a part of our sport with any sort of ultra is DNFs. And it makes sense that people are going to start to feel shame because they feel like they're not a good enough athlete, or they should have ... or if only I had ... It's called, the psych term is counterfactual thinking. We see it a lot with perfectionists, where they'll kind of like replay these scenarios in their head. And so there's a couple of things that come to mind. One, and this comes from an approach, acceptance and commitment therapy, which is really effective with athletes. There's a concept called workability. And so what you can do is you figure out, okay, you catch your thinking pattern. So let's say that, Chip DNFs, like cuts his knee really badly on a rock getting out of the swim, and then is like, tries to, the next run, whatever, just spending all this time. And then for one reason is pulled. If he starts going down that rabbit hole of like, if only I had ... you ask yourself, how are these thoughts serving me? Are they actually helping me show up as the athlete I want to be? Because if you are just beating yourself up, you're not improving anything. If these thoughts aren't actually helping me, I need to let go of them. One of the ways to let go of them is like, I'm not going to tell athletes like, oh, just, there's another one, don't worry about it. The think positive does not work with ultra endurance athletes, because we have a lot of feelings that we deal with, and many are not positive. And we also know, being like, oh, it was just the World Championships, no big deal. Like, no, that, like, we're not going to play that game. So instead, it's like, okay, this is the story of like me not being a good enough athlete. I've heard this story before. I know how this goes. And it's naming the story. And then you can do kind of tricks like, oh, instead of saying like, I disappointed Chris, like, I really ruined the race for the two of us. I noticed I'm having the thought that I ruined the race for the two of us. And you try to create more distance between the thoughts and that narrative that you have and your actual experience by recognizing these are just thoughts and stories that your brain is telling you to try to avoid shame so that it doesn't happen again, because this feeling is so bad and it's not fun. And instead, what we need to do is recognize, like, it makes sense that we do feel this way. Totally legit. So sit with those feelings, talk about them, because if we're sitting in isolation, not to call out, shame and secrecy go hand in hand. And it's kind of like it festers. So by that isolation, if we're not talking about a DNF because we're too embarrassed, or we pull our data from Strava because we don't want to talk about it, that feeds that narrative that there is something wrong with you, or you did something wrong when you didn't, right? Like, it's a part of the sport. And the more, and this is where you can see me, like, getting passionate and worked up here, because I have a lot of these conversations with athletes, is like, what do you want to model for the community, for your training partner, for your family, for your kids, for the next generation of swim runners? We know that DNFs are a part of the sport. And so it's really important that we, one, accept them, and two, talk about them, because it's a part of it. And the more that we, like, spread this narrative that, one, there's something wrong with DNFs, or two, that they, like, don't happen, the more we're setting up the next generation for those experiences as well. Does that make sense? So that's like a higher level, more meta kind of way to deal with it.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, it's the nature of things. It's that some people are going to DNF, some percentage is going to DNF.
Yep.
So, like, who are you to think that, that this, equation of the universe does, like, you're not part of it as well.
Right.
It's kind of being, like, realistic about that.
Yep.
I think, like, another thing, when Chipper and I first started racing together, and again, we've been friends for over a decade, best friends, our kids are best friends, lots of points of interconnection. Our swim run relationship is really based in love first.
Yes.
And I think that gives us a lot of opportunities to, be kind to each other and just know that, hey, we're just trying to have fun here.
Yeah.
Like, we're not professionals or anything. Even the way we would talk about how we'd be prepared for each other. So, for example, I used to always refer to it as, like, I'm going to do everything I can so I'm not the weakest link.
Yeah.
I'm just going to control all my variables, so I'll make sure I'm not the weakest link, and Chipper's going to do the same thing.
Yep.
And in the last year, I've kind of switched my thinking, and even the way I communicate with Chipper about it, to be more like, it's not about me not being the weakest link. It's like, I'm just going to give you what I have.
Yes.
I'm just going to give you what I'm capable of.
Yeah.
I'm just going to give everything I have. And if that's, I got to go slower because I'm less fit or injured or whatever.
Yep.
That's what it is. But, like, almost like separating myself from this thing. And it's like, oh, if something goes wrong, it's because I was the weakest link, rather than being like, maybe I just wasn't fit enough, or maybe some environmental thing happened, or, some gear thing, there's all these other reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's like, you're no more or less of an athlete if you DNF, like, you're the same, you're the same athlete, you're the same person. Like, you're just as valid and worthy and legit and cool and rad and, like, strong and fit, like, all of those things. The outcome of race is not dependent on, like, it doesn't, the math isn't mathing, but we simplify it as athletes, especially when we go down those rabbit holes. I think the other thing, like, my first kind of big DNF that I experienced was so I'm based in Minnesota, and we have a pretty decent winter ultra scene. So it's essentially these winter survivalist races. A lot of them are long distances, some of them hundreds of miles. There's one called Arrowhead that starts in International Falls, Minnesota, which is, like, usually the coldest city in the States in the winter. And so there are gear obligations and gear checks. Like, in order to even have a race performance that's counted, you have to finish with a certain amount of calories that won't freeze. You have to have a bivy sack so that you can stay overnight and will be protected from the elements if needed. You need a certain amount of lights, reflective gear. And it's a really intense type of racing because it's such a different skill set, especially, like, racing at night. And they'll have skiing, they'll have fat biking, and then they'll have foot. And so you can pick your skill. And it's a really cool thing. And so I did kind of this intro. It was a 40-miler on a fat bike. It started at, I want to say, 10 p.m. maybe, because they wanted it as an intro to these larger races. And I got off course. Didn't realize it until like 5 miles later, which is a lot on a fat bike at 1:30 a.m.
Turn
And
those things around.
yeah,
You got to pick it up, and then
so then I had a whole thing of like, okay, do I backtrack? Do I cut the course? Like, am I even going to finish? What do I want to do? Da da da. So they also have these skills checkpoints, which are super cool. Like you start the race in a bivy sack in your sleeping bag. And so it's kind of like a Le Mans start for bikes. So everyone's on the ground in their bivvies in the middle of the night. And then the race director is like, and go. And everyone's like crawling out. You have to pack up your gear, put it on the bikes. It has to be like secured before you start going. Otherwise, gears flying around. So it's a whole skill set. And then halfway through, you have a checkpoint where you have to boil water. Because if you get stuck out there, you have to be able to boil water. So it's a skill checkpoint. So I made it to the checkpoint. It was like 1:30 a.m. And I was friends with the race director. And I was like, Lisa, I don't know if I'm going to finish this thing. And she just looks at me and she's like, did you get what you came for? And I was like, yeah, actually I did. And that was it. And that was the decision. And I was like, cool, I think I'm done. And it was like no shame, just like, did you know what
wow.
you came for? And that was all I needed to hear to make the decision. I was like, it's not about finishing. Like, what did I come for? I came for a new experience to be like, what is this even like? This is a totally different thing I've never done. My goal for the year was to try different disciplines. This was January. So I was like, check. It wasn't about finishing. And I have no regrets. And it wasn't like, could I have toughed it out? Sure. But I don't know that I would have gotten anything from that. Like I would have just been really crabby and cold for another few hours and really tired. And I've got a job and like it's like it wasn't necessary. So I think that's another way to think about DNFs is like, did you get what you came for? But I'm like, don't let it just be the finish because it's about so much more than that.
It's like, if we're not professionals, these things should be enhancing our lives.
Yeah.
Did you learn something? Did you grow? Did you experience something new? Did you pull yourself out of your comfort zone or off the couch? Like whatever it is, you can validate.
Yeah.
Like couch to 5K, like that's huge, right?
Yes.
You survived cancer and ran a 5K, like that to me, that's as impressive as running an ultra, right?
Absolutely.
It's almost like you have to get to the point where you can kind of self-validate. I think that's what you're talking about, right? Creating some space to kind of accept it.
And kind of pushing back against that, that culture that we have as athletes that like you have to finish what you started, buck up, toughen up. Like what I often say to my athletes is like, we have this idea, it's kind of like this like David Goggins approach to mental toughness of like, get in, do the work. Like, it's like this intensity of like, I don't care how I feel. Like I'm going to get up at 4 a.m. and do it. Like, that's not my vibe. My vibe is like, get 8 hours of sleep and take care of your health so that you can have a sustainable career as an athlete and continue to do this without burning yourself into the ground. Right. And so for me, mental toughness isn't like rejecting or avoiding those difficult thoughts or feelings or distracting yourself from them. It's like sitting with them and bringing them with you over the course of the race and continuing to show up and do the hard stuff anyway, right? Like you're not blocking them out. You're bringing them with you while you continue to do hard things. Like that's what being an athlete is about. That's what mental toughness is. And sometimes that means a DNF, like sitting with that. Like that makes sense. It sucks. Yeah, you did want to finish. That makes sense. It makes sense you feel that way, no need to run from it.
Yeah.
Where do you land on, from our circles, there's this big growth equation kind of a mantra is the 24-hour rule. Like give yourself 24 hours to just the number's arbitrary, sometimes 48, like whatever you need. But idea of just like, allow yourself to go there, but give yourself a limit to then get back to the work, back to your training, do some hiking, do something. It sounds like that would be something you subscribe to, but I just
totally. For me, I'm like, let's start with the basics, especially for kind of this post-race kind of come down or let down. It's like, okay, are you still having 3 meals and 2 snacks a day? Are you still going to bed at a decent hour? Are you still getting 8 hours of sleep? Like, let's start there. And then, okay, did you go outside today? Let's start there. I don't care what you do, but just go outside, even if it means checking your mail. Cool. And so it's those little things, but feel the feels. Sometimes we often do this as therapists for folks with really severe anxiety is we'll essentially tell people like, okay, I want you to set aside 30 minutes in your day to just worry. Like that's your anxiety time. And of course, it often, like, sometimes some people do it and then like fill out things for 30 minutes. But then like, okay, cool. Like you got that down. You got it out. You took care of it. So similar for kind of that 24-hour rule is like, yeah, sit with it, but stick to the basics. Keep showing up and taking care of yourself by like eating and like sleeping and getting outside, because we know if you stop doing those things, you're gonna make the feeling, it'll last longer, right? So,
Yeah.
mhm,
Makes sense.
mhm.
So
I've just been incredibly helpful. I think a lot of people are going to take a ton of value out of it. I know I already have.
Yeah,
yeah, so let me ask you one last question,
yeah,
Erin. So we get through this post-race phase, and whatever happens, happens. You've accomplished a goal, DNF, whatever. You've come out the other side. How do you advise people around? It's like, all right, well, what's the next thing?
yes.
Like, we're ready to start getting back into more, let's set another outcome goal. How do you think about timing for that? And, sometimes it's kind of built in. It's like, oh, you did this thing, now you qualified for the Ironman World Championship, so it kind of sorts itself out.
Yeah.
But when it isn't as clear cut as that, like, what advice do you give your athletes to be like, again, success or failure? Again, for us, it's just like you did the thing.
Yep.
It's not about succeed or
It's
failure. Like,
done.
you did the
Like,
thing, you're on the other
now what?
side.
Hmm.
Now what?
Yeah. I have, and I don't even know how or when I thought of this. I just call it the scary, joyful, new framework. And so I tell athletes each season, pick one race that's scary. Like, it's like, this may or may not go down very well, or this may or may not go as expected. I'm going to be challenged and I'm going to be out of my element in some way. It could be like discipline. It's often like distance. It's kind of like this
Mm.
mix, especially for the endurance athletes. It could also be really gnarly conditions or really like technical terrain where there's a pretty decent chance of a DNF. So like that's the scary thing, where failure, air quotes, is an option. Because then you're challenging yourself and you've got that growth factor. And it also helps with motivation, usually. It's
You
scary.
fear it, you're more likely to train for it.
Yeah,
Exactly. Like that's
that's
why I
true.
sign up for them, right? Is like, oh, am I going to do this? So then that's the scary, joyful. Like we all need those races that just fill our bucket, where like the community is great or we love the course. Like there's something about it that just like fills us up. And so for me, I really love, well, I guess there's two races that come to mind. Mid South is a big kind of gravel race in Stillwater, Oklahoma. It's every March. And the community is so cool, but I think the timing of the race is awesome because we all get to see each other for the first time after hibernating for the winter. So it's an early season race, and so we get to see all of our friends from different states, and it's just such a cool community-based feel. So that's my joyful race. There's a women's triathlon here in Minneapolis that's also incredible. It's super fun. We've already identified our team name for next year, and it's going to be Hungry Hippos, and we're going to get Hawaiian hippo shirts and just try to have fun. So,
Nice.
like, just don't take yourself too seriously. Fill your bucket, do your thing. Pick something different, mix it up. Different discipline,
Mm.
different distance, different location. Try a racecation with the family, race with your kid or your spouse or your sister, brother. Do something different. As athletes, we like routines. Routines are important, but that growth factor is important. Mix it up and stay curious. That framework usually works pretty well for athletes. We've got structure and a few different ways to play and then go from there.
I love it.
Nice.
It's fun.
I love it.
It's a good framework.
Thank
This
you.
is after the 2 week blackout period of not registering for a
I
race.
tell them you can make a list, dream it up, but
You
like
can ideate,
until you see
don't pull the
me
trigger.
and we'll talk about it. And it, like, of
Yeah.
course, sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't. And like, regardless, it's fine, but we talk about it. So
Yeah.
the scary, joyful new is always a fun one. And it's great for me to push myself. So like, that's why that winter ultra was a part of that. Like, well, this is new and scary. So like,
Yeah. I
check
mean,
Yeah,
and check.
sometimes you can check like all the boxes,
Totally.
Swimrun will be up soon for you.
I am just like, I did a triathlon recently. It went really well, but the swim did not. And it was 500 meters. Let's be clear. I did breaststroke for half of it, even though I trained in the pool. And just because I wasn't training in open water, I need to practice what I preach. But if that was the reality and expectations, I didn't have a lot of expectations for the swim. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to vibe. I'm going to get through it. And then I'm going to wreak havoc on the bike and hang on for the run. And that's what I did. And it was great. So, yeah. So if bike run I mean, duathlon? Yes, sign me up.
Okay.
Well, as someone who travels with their bike, I will tell you one of the greatest things about Swimrun is not traveling with
No
a bike.
I
bike.
believe it.
Lovely.
Totally. Yes. Like, yeah, perfect for gear. Like, yeah, way easier. So I might come around eventually. I never stick to one thing for too long. Like, I like to mix it
Fair
up.
enough.
So who knows?
Fair enough. Well, Erin, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I think our audience is going to find a ton of value for this. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your sports psychology practice
Yep.
and where people can find you?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. So it's Scotty Sports Psychology. This will actually track pretty well with Low Tide Boyz. Scotty comes from Norse mythology, so it's a nod to our Norwegian roots here in Minnesota. Scotty was the Norse goddess / giantess of mountains and is often depicted with skis and a bow and arrow and snowshoes. So she's a nod to like the female athletes in Nordic skiing and winter sports that I work with. So it's Scotty Sports Psychology, SKADI. Sport is singular. I don't know why. It's just a weird thing for sports psychologists. So folks can go to scottysportspsychology.com and we can drop it in the show notes. I'm on social media, practicing what I preach, and took a break from social media for the summer, which has been really nice. But usually we post a lot of good content. It's super specific to endurance athletes. So folks can follow us on Instagram. And then, yeah, just searching for us. I mean, we're often doing like podcasts and things like that and getting out in the community. So people can hit us up. We can do mental health therapy in Minnesota and then performance coaching everywhere. And so what I say for that definition is basically if the content of sessions is about sport, it's going to be coaching. But when the mental health stuff starts to leak in and start to leak into other areas of life, that's when either if I have room on my caseload, I can work with them, or we'll just refer out and find them a mental health therapist to support our work with them. And we've got a team of 4 pretty incredible providers. Feel free to hit us up.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, thanks again, Erin, and good luck on all your upcoming gravel races.
Thank you. Thank you. Enjoy your trip as well. Well, I guess this will have aired by that point. So I hope you had a wonderful trip that filled your bucket.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. See you guys later.
All right.